Rob Davenport here from the Jungle Apocalypse podcast. This is episode number 100. Actually, we've probably skipped about 45 episodes to get to number 100, mainly just because I don't want to confuse everybody and start over. But this is basically a new podcast because I have a new co-host with me. You see him here on screen, Mike Sherwin. He's from Saskatoon. What is it, Saskatchewan?
Yeah, out in the middle of the flatlands.
Yeah, so you got two people in remote areas trying to do a podcast over the internet. So we're going to see if this all works all right.
Yeah, but sounds like fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, everybody probably remembers this Mike would be our third co-host on the show, going back to starting with Jim Bowe back in episode 0 to like 25. And then Aaron Allen from about 25 to 50. And now Mike's going to be here for a while. And we're going to change the format up a little bit. Instead of just having a guest in and badgering them with questions, we're actually going to pick out the top 10 news stories of the week, sit down and talk the shit about them and see what's really going on in the world. So let's get started with story number 1. Okay, so watch a man get arrested for talking about Nickleback. Now, this is signs of the police state. Two guys were driving by a gas station, and there was another guy in the park playing Nickleback, and they yelled out the window, "Hey, Nickleback!" And unfortunately, a couple cops that were there decided that they had said, "Hey, nickel sack," thinking that they were talking about a drug reference. So the video shows that you can watch them here on get hauled out of the car and handcuffed and detained for thinking that they were setting up a drug deal. So what do you think about this one, Mike? Is this not like an absolute sign of the police state coming down upon us?
Well, yeah, and it's just one of the many things that have been coming out in the media lately about the abuse of the police, and like they're not to help us citizens anymore, but round us up, arrest us, get all these fines and stuff to pay for all their nice new military gear that they're getting, and it kind of relates to like in my city here, we just bought another armored vehicle for our police, and it's not that good, man. Like,
why would they need an armored vehicle in Saskatoon? Are you guys having like mass terrorist organizations or something?
No, but they're using them to protect citizens in the event of a standoff. Last week we had a bunch of people shot at during an armed standoff, which is becoming way too common in this city.
Yeah, that's kind of strange. It seems like that stuff's starting to go on in a lot of rural areas in Canada where we never really saw a lot of this before. I mean, it did happen, but it was kind of rare. And all of a sudden, we seem to have like a ton of these, strange shootings by the cops and, missing Aboriginal women and just.
Oh, yeah, that's bad here too. Like horribly bad in this province.
Yeah, you got to wonder what's really going on. But when we start seeing cops pick people up for saying Nickleback, I guess in some people's mind that is a crime because Yeah,
the U.S. government has been saying that they've been monitoring online posts from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS there, and they're targeting the southwest border from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, into the United States to possibly conduct terrorist attacks because of the easy access into America through Mexico.
Now, do you think this might be another one of those neocon things where they hype it up? Like when they found the prayer rug, that wasn't really a prayer rug. It was an old jacket or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of thinking that that's what it is. They're just trying to get the fear out there a little bit more. Get people more worried and more focused on closing that border between Mexico and the States.
Yeah.
Because that gives them one more excuse. Not only now are they getting illegal immigrants in, but they're getting illegal immigrants driving car bombs in.
Yeah, exactly. Another good reason to build the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm surprised they haven't gotten away with it yet, but
well, if Texas had its way, it would be.
Well, and this thing with ISIS too, like this is really starting to spin out of control, like we bombed Saddam for a hell of a lot less than what ISIS is doing. And
exactly.
we're just playing coy with them, and I almost wonder if that kind of leads into one of our next stories here. I guess it'd be number 4. Well, let's just get on to the next story. Edmonton teacher fired for giving zeros for not doing homework, tests and wins appeal. So this poor Edmonton teacher, the kids weren't handing in their homework, so he was assigning them zeros. And if they didn't show up to a test, they got a 0. And this pampered parenting bullshit that's going around, this guy got in trouble, ended up getting fired. And the original ruling took away his I guess it doesn't say if it took away his pension, but he was basically fired. Now, the appeal board has ruled that he should get his pension topped up and be paid back pay for all that time, which I think is only fair. Mike, what do you think of this? Like, is this not the epitome of everything that's wrong with Western civilization? Like, just baby them?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it goes into the whole culture of sucks that we're raising here in North America right now. It's just, and pretty much in the entire Western culture. It's giving these people that are coming up in the world now this sense of entitlement that we didn't really get as children. Like, I remember getting many zeros and having to redo classes and stuff because I didn't attend them and didn't hand in assignments and failed. So that, and nowadays kids, they're not allowed to fail. It's almost like they're like banks, too big to fail.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I see it with the schooling here. I mean, they'll do whatever they need to do to pass a kid into the next grade, whether they're ready for it or not. And all it does is, by the time these kids are ready to go to college, they're fucked. They have no clue on how to study. They've been passed through every grade. And then all of a sudden they're thrown into this environment that, like even when we went to school, it was probably a lot harder to do school. And I still had a hell of a time when I got to college to try to pick it all up. I can only imagine, with the baby methods that they use on these kids.
Yeah, well, it's they're no longer teaching grammar in school, or teaching how to spell words properly or anything like that. Then they're definitely not preparing the kids to go into university because the professors aren't going to take the time to teach kids grammar anymore.
Yeah,
like they just don't have the time to do it. And yeah, it's I don't know how many kids I know who've gone into high school that don't know how to read properly. They can barely get through. Like, they got like a grade 2 or 3 reading level, and that's not a good thing. It's just easier for people to be manipulated when they're undereducated that way.
Well, and I think, my wife was talking about going to the bookstore and looking for Brave New World because she's never read it. And like I described to her, I mean, that's where we're headed now. It is exactly like it talked about in Brave New World with 4 classes of people. And we're raising an entire class of people that don't know how to spell. They can't write their own names. They can't really read. All they do is suck in information from the TV and stupid things like World Star Hip Hop. And they have no clue on how the world really works. What's there going to be for them in 20 years?
Basically just jobs pushing buttons.
Exactly. And taking, vast amounts of drugs to cope with the situation.
Situations. Yeah, exactly. More dependency on everything that isn't themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the pass the buck society where they're always passing the buck. It's not my fault. It's, the systems, or it's this or it's that. And reality.
Themselves.
Yeah, exactly. In reality, we do control our own reality to a point, and if more people actually started working at it instead of allowing them to be sucked into the system, they might actually get some changes made.
Exactly. And like this story too really brings home once again to me the whole thing that we're starting to live in the movie Idiocracy.
Yeah. Let's get on to the next story.
This one made me laugh a lot because it's just too hilarious, man. Our world leaders are acting like a bunch of teenagers in high school.
That's exactly it.
It all started out the day that the NATO was saying that Russian forces had invaded Ukraine, and the Canadian NATO delegation went to their Twitter account and posted a map of that region of the world. Russia was labeled as Russia, and then the Crimean region and the Ukraine was labeled not Russia. And it went along with, I got it written down here. Where'd I put that? The words were, geography can be tough. Here's a guide for Russian soldiers who keep getting lost and accidentally entering #Ukraine. And
it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous that this is what it's come to.
Russia's NATO account followed up on Thursday by tweeting their own map that marks the disputed Crimean Peninsula as part of Russia. And it also highlights the Abkhazia and South Ossetia regions, which were split from Georgia in 2008, with the text, helping our Canadian colleagues to catch up with contemporary geography.
Well, and you got to wonder, too, because I know most Canadians, we're not in any sort of mood to start a war with Russia. I think most of us realize that our military would be woefully inept at trying to fend off the Russians should we pick too much of a fight. Oh, go ahead.
And really, all it would take would be for them just to come over the north and say, well, you're ours now, goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're back. I starting to wonder. This brings us into one of our other stories. I'm going to change the order here just a little bit because I think these two stories should be together. But Ukraine says Russian tanks flatten town. EU to threaten more sanctions. And as I bring it up on screen here. This is from Reuters. Ukraine said Russian tanks have flattened a small border town and pro-Russian rebels had made fresh gains in its east as EU leaders signaled on Saturday they would threaten more sanctions against Moscow over the crisis. And here we go, more, them saying Russia's being aggressive. And it's actually, none of it's proven in court. I still haven't seen any sort of documentation that Russia is being aggressive here. All I see is these rumors from NATO. And now they're claiming that the Russians have flattened a town. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah, well, why would they want to destroy the area of the Ukraine, of these people who on their end, they're supposedly trying to help? Mm-hmm. Why would they want to destroy like the infrastructures and stuff and the houses of these people? To me, like he said, makes no sense. And as far as I've heard too and read and stuff and about the whole situation, Russia is not really trying to invade the Ukraine. They're trying to help the people who had a referendum that said that they wanted to separate from the Ukraine. Yeah,
that's the other thing too. Like, they're not really. Maybe they are shipping arms in. Like, I wouldn't put it past Putin to be, dirty balling in the situation. But when you look at the actual facts of what's been released, there's no information out there that's really proof of anything. I mean, we had a plane that was basically shot out of the sky, and then all of a sudden we're not talking about that anymore. What happened to that? Everybody suddenly forgot that they shot this plane out of the sky, and as soon as they couldn't prove it was the Russians, back down the memory hole with that story. We're not going to talk about that one.
Sweep it under the rug, just like the other Malaysian airlines.
What other Malaysian airlines? There wasn't a second one. Well, what's funny too, if you want to talk about weird coincidences in the media, if you go and look at Sherlock, I think it's season 3, episode 3, where they load an entire plane full of dead bodies and crash it to make it look like some terrorists blew it up.
Just that one.
Isn't that not weird?
Yeah, it's a little too coincidental for my likings.
Yeah.
And like the way I look at things is there is no such thing as a coincidence. It's
not when it comes to stuff like this. Like, I mean, how fishy. We have a plane that disappears that they can't find, and there's drama made for a month and a half about it. And then 3 months later, we have the same airline have a plane get shot out of the sky, and there's all this commotion about it,
and then it just goes away.
Yeah, and then there was Russian reports that the bodies taken out of the wreckage had no blood in them, and
had already been dead for like at least 3 weeks before the plane crashed.
Yeah. Now that makes you really start to wonder if there wasn't some fishy business going on there, because the Russian media is portraying something totally different. Like if you watch RT and the way they're reporting on it, not necessarily saying it isn't unbiased. It's definitely propaganda.
Well, it's pro-Russian for sure.
But there's still a lot of stuff they talk about that you never hear on this side of the pond. Whether it's true or not, I think it's important to take into account at least.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it helps get you both sides of the story, which is kind of what you need when you're looking at media like this, especially news stories involving war disputes or disputed zones.
Well, you look at, I've been doing a lot of watching old World War II documentaries and whatnot, and you see how propaganda worked back then when you couldn't verify things, and they'd spread rumors around and do all these, dirty things to get these stories embedded into our heads. At least now we can kind of go out, if you're smart enough, you go out and look at both sides of the story and try to come up with some logical conclusion and get rid of the propaganda. But it's not the easiest thing to do.
No, and sometimes it's really hard to find, even with like tools like the internet and stuff, the second side to those stories too, because a lot of the times it's, unless you have access to the Tor browser, you can't get to a lot of the places where the other side of the story is.
Yeah, exactly, which makes you really wonder. All right. Well,
and then because it's connected with Tor too, you got to be a little leery of the whole information flow there as well.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure the NSA's got some monitoring going on there that we don't know about, because they keep nabbing guys from Tor. So, well, speaking of Tor there, I read another article last week too about how the NSA there's a faction within the NSA that's ratting itself out for the bugs on Tor. Yeah,
like there's one that treats these bugs, and another one that comes in, fixes them, and then tells everybody about them.
Yeah, you kind of got to wonder about that. I don't know. I'm always leery of stories like that because they just could be disinformation. So,
well, yeah, and it wasn't coming from a major tech site or anything like that. It was like from one of those. It was a Blogspot article, I think, that I read.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's always a real key, is make sure you check the source. It was
sources, yes.
Who was it? The top 5 things Adam Sandler predicted in his movies. And it was from one of the Onion subsites, and people ran with that story everywhere. Especially the white supremacists. They're all like, see, the Jew knows what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. The Jew knows. Okay, let's get on to the next story. So Ebola Liberians destined for extinction. And this is, I encourage everybody to go over and read it. I'll put the link in the show notes along with the other stories we talked about today. But this is just a blog from a medical student that's dealing with the Ebola outbreak currently in Western Africa. And it's getting to the point where whatever they tell us, a couple weeks later, they're proven to be totally underestimating the situation. When it started off, they were like, I remember hearing a month ago them saying, oh, the peak's over. This is it.
Keep getting further and further spread throughout Western Africa there. Senegal yesterday announced their first case of Ebola.
Yeah. And it's there was a case outbreak, or 24 cases in the Congo that they're claiming is unrelated to any of this, which I mean, it could be, but I find it awful fishy that it's all coming out at once. And they were talking like a month ago that it was going to be, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people, 5,000 max. Now they're saying, it could be over 20,000. And they're totally underestimating them, because if you read these blogs from people that are actually working there, you hear about Ebola. The number one way it's contracted is through bodily fluids. So once you start showing symptoms or you die, you're able to transmit that disease to other people. Now, people are dying in these remote villages. There's nobody to come pick them up for 3 or 4 days. So the family are being, forced to deal with it. And because of burial rituals and all these other things that come with that area, they're contracting Ebola from their dead relatives, and it's just getting passed around. And it's crazy. They're trying to. Happen to notice that all the big drug manufacturers just happen to be working on this new Ebola virus drug, and everybody's getting it. So ZMapp is saving the world. I don't know. I got a funny feeling, Mike, where this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, you and me both. I've been kind of following this Ebola thing for like the last about month and a half or so, and even through one of the subreddits, which is True Stories, No Sleep on Reddit. There was a major meme involving the Ebola virus. There's like 5 or 6 loosely related stories that people wrote in, and one of them was supposedly from a doctor who was over there treating patients. And he was saying, and I don't really believe this, that it's one of the signs of the apocalypse, that he supposedly came across these 4 people who are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Huh.
But then it is through a thing called No Sleep on Reddit, and you have to believe the stories when you comment, but a lot of it could be fictitious.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the way with a lot of the conspiracy paranormal realm. I think it's mainly ghost stories, dreamt up to keep the people awake at night. And,
you got it.
And the reality of it is, I mean, yeah, Ebola, if it goes airborne like Marburg did, the Marburg virus back in the 70s,
there's no stopping it.
Yeah, that could be a very serious problem. But I mean, as long as it stays in its current Ebola form, probably going to be all right. I'm not too worried about it. So
yeah.
Let's get on to the next story.
Yeah, seeing as like there's been all those sinkholes and stuff happening all over the world there. This story kind of caught me with a lot of interest too. Is methane discovered leaking off the sea floor of the U.S. coast. Scientists have discovered some 570 plumes of methane billowing from the sea floor off the eastern United States coast or sea coast. And also through this, they figure that there's around 33,000 other methane vents hidden throughout the globe. And they're pretty sure that it's due to the climate change that's going on right now. It's starting to free up the methane that's frozen in the permafrost and stuff or throughout the earth. Mm-hmm. And it's releasing it. And yeah, basically just letting it go into the atmosphere to cause more greenhouse gases.
Well, and this is something, and I'm sure you remember, I had Guy McPherson on. I've had him on 2 or 3 times now.
And this is one of the things he was warning us about. From
day one. These things would continue to happen in a cascading fashion. I mean, we just had Prime Minister Harper go to the Northwest Passage. That says a lot on how much it's changed up here. It's funny. You can almost see the YouTube comments now. It's like, you guys are shilling. You're shilling for somebody.
Yeah.
We're not.
I can read it now.
Yeah. Honestly, dude, come up north and live here for a few years and see what it's like. I mean, how much it's changing.
Well, hey, even me, I don't live that far north. Like we're pretty much where Saskatoon is pretty much in the middle of Canada. And yeah, like the last 3 years, fall has come a lot quicker and our summers have been a lot shorter and a lot wetter than they should be.
Exactly. And now see where we are, the summers were usually short and somewhat dry, not super dry, but dry. And now it's extremely dry and our summers are lasting longer. And we're not that far away from where you guys are. Like these things are changing everywhere. And it's not like the entire globe's going to heat up all at one time. It's climate change, asshole. It's not climate fucking global warming or global
instantaneous.
We don't know what the response of the planet is going to be if we start releasing large amounts of greenhouse gases. We really don't.
Exactly.
The only thing we have right now are what scientists have figured out, and they're not even 100% sure because until it happens, how will they know?
Yeah, they're just going on the theories and stuff that they pretty much can see by throwing their stuff into the computer models and running the tests to see what's happening. And yeah, it does not look good.
No. But it goes back to the meme I seen the other day on the internet where it was, the media tells us that Ebola is there, but scientists say don't freak out. And then everybody's like, oh my God, Ebola. Oh my God, Ebola. And then the scientists are like, hey, climate change is real, freak out. And they're like, oh my God, Ebola. Oh my God, Ebola.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, that goes to show you the power of the media. Hey,
well, that's the thing.
It's the most on.
And you look at the alternative media, and those are the people that really bug me with it, because they're all, everything's chemtrails, it's chemtrails. It's chemtrails. Yeah. Come on, man. Like, maybe they are spraying chemtrails, but if they are, it's to counteract what they had already done with pollution.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically what I've come to see too. I don't really believe that they're dropping barium on us or aluminum or things like that so that they can track us through satellites and things like that. That to me is a little far-fetched, and it would take a lot of barium that we could probably see in the sky at night when they were dropping it on us.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing too. It's slightly radioactive, so we should be able to see, some more effects than it just doesn't make sense. And every time you see them bring in their water samples and say, "Oh, this is chemtrail spray," there's a million other things that can cause those. So you can't tell me that's chemtrails. And until I see proof.
It's just like a couple of years ago, I was watching a couple of YouTube videos about people with gooey dew on their plants in the morning after a rain, and there was chemtrails in the sky before the day before. And it's just like, well, that could just be plant resins coming out with the water.
There's a lot of things that can explain that stuff, and yet people still get caught up going down those rabbit holes. So,
oh yeah, like the chemtrail thing, it is a really believable conspiracy theory. Mostly because we have been spraying things in the sky for years. Let's look at like back in the 20s and 30s when skywriting was a very popular way of communicating with people. Mm-hmm. The fact that we do crop dusting and stuff, I could believe that they are spraying things in the atmosphere, but whether it's for the negative things that people are talking about, or if it is as a response to, say, alternative 3, the second alternative, and they're trying to fix what they made a mistake of trying to fix earlier.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, what gets me the most is, people have an easy time believing that Fukushima blew up and spewing radioactive waste into the ocean hand over fist.
No, it didn't explode. It crumbled in on itself.
Well, yeah, but
fell into a fault.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, though, right? Like, people will freak out about that, but yet they don't freak out about the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the environment. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Oh yeah. Well, it's probably because they don't want to have to stop driving the cars that they got and all the other things that we need and use that require fossil fuels to be burnt.
Yeah, exactly. But let's get on to the next story. So this happened a few weeks ago in British Columbia called Mount Polley. It was a mine that had tailings ponds where they take all the mine dust from drilling and whatnot, suck it up to the surface, stick it in these ponds, and usually these tailings are loaded with toxic chemicals.
Cyanide, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it depends on what they were mining and how they were processing it and whatnot. But there's a ton of chemicals in it. And now this tailing pond collapsed and went down through an entire valley. And the local residents are reporting this blue waxy sheen floating on the lake just below the mine tailing disaster. It spilled 14.5 million cubic meters of toxic-laden mining waste slurry, which is just a nice way of saying that it's loaded with arsenic, cyanide. This isn't just, some petrochemicals in the water. This is a very serious thing. As I talked about before on some of the other podcasts, I used to work at one of the biggest mining disasters in Canada, the giant mine site here in Yellowknife. And I mean, the entire area there is just covered with toxic laden chemicals and whatnot. And I can only imagine what was up here in this one. And now if that happened in if our tailings ponds collapse, Yellowknife would probably be done as a city. So I'm just wondering what's going to happen to these people in BC.
Yeah, who knows? Like if they're not honest with what all the chemicals that are in there are, there's no telling what could happen to these people, and who knows if they're going to get any compensation or anything from the company that's responsible.
Well, the other thing too to take into consideration is how long has that tailings pond been there, and how have mining regulations changed since the beginning? Because if you go look at Giant Mine, for example, they opened in like 1954. And back then, there were no real limits on what they could do. So they were dumping sulfur and arsenic and everything out everywhere all over the land. So if this mine site, I don't know how old it was, maybe if it's only 20 or 30 years, it's probably not that bad. But it's still, you don't know what's in the bottom of those ponds. I think it's going to be something to keep an eye on, because it's, that's a very serious event.
Well, yeah. That's going to be a major disaster there for sure. Now that I got onto the webpage there, the Vice page there, and seen the article, I kind of remember now seeing this.
Yeah, look at the videos of it. You can go check them out on YouTube and see. There's this sheen on the top of this the water, and it stings like you got stung by a jellyfish if you get your skin on it. So,
that does not sound like fun.
Not at all. So,
what about the poor animals in that region too?
Well, that's the other thing too, like the fish, the animals that drink the water, the beavers, maybe it might not kill them, but they take it in, and then you have the problem with the toxicity building up through the food chain. Maybe a small fish can ingest it and not have too many problems, but then a bird comes along and eats 100 of those small fish, and next thing you know, they're loaded with the toxins as well. So
and then their predators eat them, and so on and so forth. Yeah, just goes along the whole food chain.
Exactly. It's scary. Anyway, let's get on to the next story.
It's a little bit more of a lighter story than what we were dealing with here. Scientists in Russia have announced that they discovered plankton living on the outside of the ISS. They were... they're not sure how the stuff is living out there, but they went and I guess some cosmonauts were out doing like some repair work or just checking out the hull of the International Space Station, and they just took some swabs and samples and found plankton living on it. And the plankton that they found aren't the same as the plankton from the Baikonur, Kazakhstan region, where they launched the rocket to get the shuttle, or not the shuttle, but the ISS up there. Yeah. And then this Jesus Diaz suggests that their appearance lends credence to the theory that life is carried and seeded by comets and asteroids.
That's one of the best explanations I've seen for life being spread around the universe. And you know what? That makes perfect sense. I'm not surprised, I guess, in a way that they'd find it. I'm just wondering, hopefully they don't bring that shit back to Earth.
They have sent it to Earth to do tests on it.
And then there's an Ebola outbreak. But
kind of reminds me of the original Night of the Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Or Night of the Comet. All right. Well, let's just get into the last story here. Mystery solved: the sailing stones of Death Valley seen in action for the first time. Now, Mike, this is another one of your stories, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, this one, I found out about the sailing stones watching William Shatner's Weird or What. And it was one of those things that kind of made me go, that's interesting. It probably has something to do with like some form of ice or something, even though it is in the middle of the desert and things. They can still have ice and stuff form, because it does get cold enough at night for ice and stuff to form, especially at night too, seeing as there's condensation. Well, at Racetrack Playa, a scientist by the name of Richard Norris and his cousin John Norris and another scientist by the name of Ralph Lorenz, they got together to do this study on what causes the stones of Racetrack Playa to sail around the desert. So what they did is they set up high resolution weather stations capable of measuring wind gusts in 1 second intervals and as low as 3 to 5 meters per second for speed. And then they set up 5 rocks with custom built GPS units in them to monitor the movement of the rocks. But they weren't allowed to use the actual native rocks in Playa or racetrack Playa. The U.S. Geological Service wouldn't let them use the ones there. So they brought in their own rocks, set them up. And in December of 2013, they discovered the Playa was covered with a shallow pond of water around 7 centimeters, about 3 inches deep. And shortly after that, around noon, the ice started to melt and crack. And the wind picked up and started blowing the rocks around.
Huh. Well, that finally explains what happened.
Yeah, and it takes 4 rare combinations of events together to have that happen, which is the Playa fills with water, deep enough for floating ice, but shallow enough to expose the rocks. The ice, when it forms, is known as window pane ice. Needs to be thin, yet thick enough to maintain its strength. And then as the sun hits the ice sheet, causing it to melt and break apart, the panels start to float a little bit, and then the winds come along and push them.
Wild.
Yeah, but it can't be a strong wind either. It has to be between 3 meters per second to around 15 meters per second at the fastest.
Huh. That's really interesting. I never thought, I guess it makes sense when you stop and you look at it, but I've only heard bits and pieces about these moving rocks. So it's kind of interesting to finally see an explanation for it.
Yeah. That's what I thought too. Cause on the Weird or What episode that I watched, this is basically the theory that they came up with, but they weren't sure if it was exactly how it worked, and they couldn't really prove it with the methods that they had. And I do believe they were interviewing the Norris cousins there on that episode of Weird or What.
I'll have to go back and look it up, but
I can't remember which one it was. But if you have history too, it's on every weekday.
Yeah, well, there you go. Alrighty, Mike. Well, thanks for coming by. This is, like I said, episode number 100, and we'll be back every week doing top 10 stories of the week and try to keep everybody informed. And we're going to be
entertained.
Yeah, hopefully. We're going to be bringing in some guest hosts as well to come in and sit in the third chair. We've talked to Mr. Gates so far, has been the only one that responded back, but we've got some other guys lined up. So,
right on. Mr. Gates has always been one of my favorites.
Yeah, he's awesome to do the news with too. He's always got a really fresh perspective on it. So,
yeah, and there's a few things I would like to discuss with him about what's going on in his region of the world right now too.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be rolling that into that episode. So, anyhow, everybody, make sure to come by bravenewmedia.tv, sign up for the mailing list. We're going to be launching the website in trying to bring up the screen. 36 days, 8 hours, and 37 minutes from the time we record this. So depending on when you're seeing it, it's almost time. The actual website's going to be turned on with 31 days left to go before the launch of the website, or launch of the channel officially. What I've decided to do is just turn on the website so that we can have something there for people to go check out. We're going to be posting news, other shows that we find interesting, and, all kinds of cool shit. So come by and check it out, bravenewmedia.tv, and don't forget to subscribe to the mailing list, or you can go over to Facebook. If you like this show and you want to keep intact with all these news stories we put out, go to facebook.com/Jungle Apocalypse. There you'll be able to like the page and keep in track of everything we post, because we're constantly posting news stories on there. A lot of stuff that never makes it, that's never going to make it on this show because there's just too much information. But, all kinds of cool stuff. So check it out, facebook.com/Jungle Apocalypse. I'm Rob Davenport.
And I'm Mike Sherwin.
Mike Sherwin's here with me. So anyway, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, see ya.